Well, what will happen tonight in Atlanta, Chelsea? Who will tattoo the other team? Oh, a classic battle in the NFC South. Bucks at Falcons. Bucks are 3-1. Falcons are 2-2. Falcons laying 1.5 at home. The Falcons are minus 125. The Bucks are plus 105. Your total is 43.5. Some interesting trends here. As a dog on short rest, Baker Mayfield 5-2 against the number. One of the top 10 marks in the NFL in the last 20 years. Falcons are 2-10 against the number in their last 12 games after a straight-up win to beat the Saints last week. And over the last 5 seasons, your guy, Kirk Cousins, well, just a guy, not your guy, 14-27 against the number playing indoors, including 1-10 against the number in his last 11 games indoors. Will that influence how you bet this game tonight?
I don't think so. I think it's a narrative for a reason, but I don't think it's a narrative enough for me to either go against him or play him here. Maybe you could tail it into playing an interception prop, but I think for me, if we're leaning towards the side here, I'm leaning towards the points and the Bucks. I think for me, it's been their defense that looks better than the Falcons thus far. If you look at them, even against some really high-end offenses, the Bucks have been able to limit some of these high-scoring offenses to, limited production when it comes to the scoring. Looking at the Eagles last week, only gave up 16 points to them. To the Lions, despite giving up 300 yards passing to Jared Goff, the Lions only ended with 16 points. And then the Commanders, whose offense looks way better than I think people were predicting, Commanders only had 20. So I think for me, you have two quarterbacks who I kind of put in the same category. Mm-hmm. And the difference maker, I think, is going to be the defense for me. So I'm going to go with the Bucks here on the road here. Getting the 1.5. I also think this is a great teaser leg. If you want to combine it with something else, Bucks getting 7.5. I think that's a great leg.
Oh, okay. I like that. My favorite bet here is the under, but I will say when it comes to a side, I like the Bucks here. I just trust Baker Mayfield more than I trust Kirk Cousins right now. And Kirk Cousins hasn't quite lended that explosiveness to the offense that we thought we were going to see, at least not thus far. And you mentioned Kyle Pitts earlier. At what point do we admit that maybe Kyle Pitts just isn't going to be Kyle Pitts? Like coming out of Florida, he was supposed to be this otherworldly, the next great tight end in the National Football League, and he's been fine. He's been just fine. But relative to expectation, he has never become this guy, this elite tight end that we thought he was going to be. And I think we have a big enough sample size now. Now he has a quarterback who can throw to him, and he's just a guy. And I saw some film that someone posted on X over the past week, and it was showing him running routes, and they were trying to point out that he's not being nearly as assertive, as aggressive you need to be when running routes. Like if the play isn't coming to him, he's not necessarily going all out. I don't know if that's part of the explanation, the complete explanation, whatever it is. I think we can all agree he has not lived up to expectation. So I'm not sold on that Falcons offense. And also we know what Todd Bowles and that defense is going to do. They're going to rush, blitz, put pressure on Kirk. And I'm not quite so sure, even with what he's supposed to have as far as his offensive weapons are concerned, I'm not quite so sure that it's going to work out well for the Falcons. Both sides are banged up. I know Antoine Winfield is out for the Bucs. That's a big loss defensively, but I would still be on Tampa Bay.
I think if you're expecting pressure on the quarterback when it comes to Kirk Cousins, that's when we see the short and dumpy passes that I like to play on some of these short weeks. So I feel like it's a good spot for Bijan Robinson. We know he has good hands already, but looking at his receiving prop this week, it is set at 26.5. I will be hitting the over there because matchup-wise, this is a good one. Going against a Bucs defense that's allowed a ton of receiving yards to opposing running backs, giving up the second most receiving yards to running backs. And as far as targets go, they're in the top 5 as well. Third most targets in the NFL to opposing running backs. If you look at all their games this season, they've given up at least one running back to this number for the receiving yards. So I think this is a great spot for Bijan Robinson. I'll go over his receiving props. The other prop that I wanted to throw out there, me and Bill were talking about this, or Bill and I were talking about this, is the Cade Otton one. The tight end for the Bucs has been putting up some big numbers in recent games, especially when it comes to the targets and receptions. He's had 13 receptions over the last 2 games, along with 99 receiving yards. So we're seeing low totals for him across the board. Receiving yards set at 29.5, receptions is 3.5, actually juiced to the under here. So Jenks, when you see a trend like this, where a player is getting a ton of targets and a ton of action, sometimes we can't just assume that the trend is going to go straight up, because that's not how trends work. But what about Cade Otton here? Do you think he continues to see the targets here? Is this too simplistic of a handicap when you see a player that has all these targets taking the over?
No, I don't think so. I think sometimes a simple handicap is the right handicap, you know? And it doesn't necessarily have to be complex. And so I think when you're talking about a Falcons defense that leaves a lot to be desired, and Cade Otton is a guy who Baker Mayfield looks for on a regular basis, then why not? Yeah, and also, don't you think it depends, but when you're not talking about someone who is necessarily a big name compared to maybe the more elite tight ends, that there's also more of a chance that bettors aren't necessarily on that player, which maybe gives you a touch more value. I like it.
Well, also you're getting a lower number, because that's the thing with a lot of these props. Like, you're playing a number. Like, for example, like if you ever play CeeDee Lamb, like his receiving props in the 80s, like when you're looking at Cade Otton, he's not a big name receiver. And also he is competing for targets with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Usually there's enough to go around. It's as much of a passing offense that it doesn't seem to matter. It's similar to like what you see for the Lions. There's so much offense going on in Detroit where everybody eats. And I think that's probably going to be the case when it comes to Cade Otton. It's a low number. He's been getting the targets. Last week, as far as targets go, he was tied with Chris Godwin for 9 targets. So I think I would still go over his receiving prop. And quickly, we haven't touched on the total. Nope. Jenks, I think you like the under here.
Love the under. Love it. I don't believe in either of these teams necessarily on a short week. I feel like this is going to be it's going to be some low scoring. It's not going to be a grind necessarily, but this has 21-20 written all over it. And I think the Bucs are going to cover here. But the trends are your friend here. The under is set in 9 of Kirk Cousins' last 10 starts. And I think that when it comes to that Falcons offense, I'll say it again, Todd Bowles is going to blitz. I think that will hamper what they can do offensively. And also, if you look at the Falcons in the red zone, they're one of the worst red zone teams in the NFL this season. I think they settled for field goals instead of touchdowns. I don't know how many points the Bucs are going to ring up, but it should be enough, and I think their defense will be enough to keep the Falcons together with however many points Tampa Bay puts on the board to keep it under the number. So I will be going under in tonight's game.